Welcome everybody to my podcast, Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane. I'm delighted to have all of you here today. So this podcast series came about because I wrote a book this last year that'll be coming out in October called Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, of the same title. And I wrote this because I personally learned about principles of resilience 40 years ago that helped me understand how my mind worked and how my experience wasn't coming from all the things out there that looked like were stressing me out and burning me out, but were coming from how I was thinking and using my mind in the moment to moment, to create my unique reality, my unique experience of life. And that really transformed my life of burnout to a life of service and giving to others, and another 40 years in my career of just really loving what I do and being just as enthusiastic about it as I was when I entered the field. So as COVID hit a little over a year ago, I looked at a lot of my colleagues and people that I had worked with as clients and noticed that people who had kind of this immunity, this vaccination of understanding how their mind worked from the inside out to create our experience, that those people were going through this very difficult, challenging time we're in with a lot more ease, a lot more resilience, a lot more creativity, and an ability to adapt and recreate their jobs and kind of go with the flow and go through it with much more grace than most of the other people that I encountered. It seemed that most people were really suffering with this and getting hopeless and discouraged and angry and divided in their families, etc. So I knew I had to get the word out to the world to help people understand that they have the power. We all have the power within ourselves to create our own experience of life. And the more we see that, the more this innate power of resilience, this innate mental health, this innate capacity of our spirit to thrive and to create and to renew ourselves moment by moment becomes much more available, becomes much more present in our lives. So I started writing this about a year ago and decided that the best way to talk about this is to tell stories. So I interviewed a lot of people. And three of those people are going to be on the podcast with me today. Teresa Walding, who's an RN from Texas, who will introduce herself more thoroughly in just a moment, has had training in the three principles and is now a trainer and a coach, working with other nurses, coaching them and how to be more resilient in their careers. And Debbie Milam, oh, there she is up in that corner, is also a professional person working primarily in the mental health field, but has worn many hats, writing curriculums in education, in many different fields. She's an extraordinary public speaker, a songwriter, a musician, used to write for United Press International as a consultant. So she is a very talented person, but her story is she's been in the process of a major illness for quite a long period of time. And she's going to talk about how her understanding of these principles has helped her not just cope with the pain, the suffering, the uncertainty, the unknowing, but actually thrive in that period of time. And lastly, Louise O'Daliagh from Ireland, Northern Ireland. She's a director of quality care, I believe is your title, for the National Health Service in Northern Ireland, and has been an RN for many, many years. And she and I spoke together last year at a conference in London about healthcare. And so we have just a great team of people here to share their story, how this has personally helped them and how it's helped them as professionals to help other people and to not lose your bearings in the process, to remain resilient yourself. So I kind of got into the field of healthcare in a backwards way. Obviously I'm a psychologist, so I was in the healthcare field, but not working directly in physical healthcare. But a number of years ago, I was asked to work with a hospital in Minneapolis, North Memorial Hospital, to help change their culture. And so I worked with them, and along with Mavis Karn, for about 4 years. And that was kind of my introduction to working in healthcare. Mostly working with the nursing staff, but also with administrative staff, teaching the same principles that we call 3-principle psychology or resilience to that hospital system. And the results were remarkable, which led me to get a job at the University of Minnesota Medical School and to work with a program called the Inner Life of Healers to develop retreats and seminars and training programs for people across the spectrum of healthcare: pharmacy, medicine, nursing, social work, psychology, you name it. And when I was working in that program, I had the great honor to meet Earl Bakken, who was the discoverer of the heart pacemaker. He was one of our funders for the Inner Life of Healers program. And Earl Bakken also founded a company called Medtronics, which is a major healthcare technological company that makes pacemakers and all kinds of wonderful technological advancements that have helped so many people. Someone's trying to get in to the room, James. And my wife and I, Michael, had the privilege to go to the Big Island of Hawaii, where he lived, and to meet with him because we were going to start doing retreats on the Big Island in Hawaii at his hospital and retreat center he had there. And so when we went to meet him, and he was an extraordinarily gracious person. He's passed away since. But I asked him, I said, well, Earl, how did you get interested in supporting programs that help with the state of the mind of the healthcare provider? How did you get interested in the mind-body connection? And he said, it was really interesting. He says, I'm an engineer. I'm a scientist. I'm a very skeptical guy. But I was doing research on pacemaker rejection. And he said, this anomaly kept showing up in all of our research studies, that one of the primary predictive factors in whether or not a pacemaker was rejected or stayed in the body and adapted to the body adapted to it, was the state of the mind of the surgeon performing the implant. And he thought, oh, that's really weird. That can't be true. There must be a mistake. And it just did not fit with his kind of analytical model. But study after study, that same anomaly started popping up. And he started realizing that the better the bedside manner of the surgeon, the nicer the feeling, in a sense, the more caring, the more loving, the more present, the better the result. And so that got him, as a scientist, very curious. And he started exploring the whole mind-body connection. And that led him to funding our program. So we kind of, in the general culture, we kind of see that there is a connection between how we think and the attitude of the patient in healing and all that. And that in nursing school, all you nurses will talk about this, you learn that the most important thing is to be caring, and your compassion and all that is so important, not just your techniques or passing pills, it's who you are. But that's gotten kind of pushed aside because people haven't had an understanding to know, how do I keep my bearings in the incredible challenges of change that's happening in the healthcare field, and with just the pressure of just a normal working day, but then add on to that the pandemic and all that's happened with that. So this podcast is going to address, through two nurses and Debbie, who's currently a patient, but also a healthcare provider. So I would like them to share their stories, and they'll each have about 15 minutes, and we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for your questions and answers or comments. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Teresa. You can begin.
Hey, Joe, thanks. Wow. There's many parts of what you just said that I resonate with the physician, with the pacemaker. When I first got out of nursing school, I read a book by Bernie Siegel, Love, Miracle, and Medicine. And that gave me an eye-opening experience. I started out in ICU. I actually met my mother-in-law in my first job. She says her brother used to say, "How's that wife you picked for your son?" That was kind of funny. But that book, I think, was like the beginning of my deeper understanding of the human nature of healing, because it opened my eyes to a little bit of a different perspective I hadn't considered. And I think that was the very, very beginning. I always was a holistic nurse person. We grew up with naturopathic doctors and chiropractics. That was our main level of care growing up. And then as I got into my career, you get busy and you sort of forget some of the things that you learned in nursing school, and I stopped taking more care of myself and took more care of other people. And I think that was one of the things that happened was, we don't teach healthcare providers to take care of themselves first. It's not part of the equation, or it wasn't part of my training. Everything we learned was about taking care of other people. So by the time I came to, let's see, about 2010 or so, I actually met Lynn McCrite through a mutual friend of mine that I worked with. And some of you know her, she's here today. It sort of took a completely different turn. She started the Holistic Nurses chapter here in Texas, Central Texas. And that friend gave her my name. And a year later, she called and she's like, I'm starting a holistic chapter and I want you to come be a speaker. And I was like, I don't talk in front of anybody. I don't think I can do that. I'd been out of the education realm for quite a while. And as things have it, she called back a week later and she's like, how about now? And I was like, well, okay. And that started me on this path of learning about modalities and things that help people. And at the same time, I'm still running on empty in my life. And one day we're talking about, well, how can we help healthcare providers heal? How can we help these people who are caring for all of these wonderful people out here heal on their own personal level? And she's like, well, I learned this thing about 40 years ago or 30 years ago, it might have been at the time. And she said, I'd like to bring that to the people. Well, she was talking about the principles. And so we're after a conference and we're in a car and we're riding. And I was like, well, how do you learn these principles? And she said, I can't teach them to you. It's an insight. You have to experience it. Well, my brain went immediately to, what do you mean you can't teach these to me? I've been through nursing school. I've been doing these things. And she kind of left me there. And I was like, well, I wonder what these principles are and how can this help us and what can this do? So about 8 months later, I guess, Dr. Blevins came we do a conference, an annual conference or retreat every year for our Central Texas Holistic Nurses chapter. And Dr. Blevins was our speaker. And his only topic was, why aren't we more resilient? And he came, it was a Friday night kind of get together, a little barbecue. And then the full day conference was the next day. And he came and he started talking about things like separate realities. How does a separate reality help us? I was like, well, I know we all think differently, and that was no problem. But then he kept talking about these principles and how they're foundational and how it actually gives us a come from that we can see us as the thinker in the present moment. And I really like that because I was having a lot of thinking about the future. I was going through some things in my life at the time, family-wise and job-wise, and my own health was suffering. I've been suffering from chronic pain for about 5 years, and I was tired. And he started talking about thinking in ways that never really worked. They didn't work that way. Well, I was letting circumstances, people, situations be my guide for what I was putting out all these fires, and it didn't work. And what I heard that morning at 9:31 in the morning was that I was only responsible for me. My thought, my feeling about whatever's happening in my life. But it allowed me that pause or that space of being able to go, oh. And I heard it at a really deep level. You know, we talk about the feeling of it. It was a full body experience. A feeling flooded over me of knowing, I think for the very first time, I truly was the thinker and feeler of my experience, independent of the circumstance. And the pain melted away. It was gone. It just went away. And I thought, what is this guy talking about? You know, and so I listened intently the rest of the conference, but I was really caught up in this inner knowing of this, the power of knowing how something works versus how it doesn't work was mind blowing. So then here comes, you know, a few years later, this thing we're calling a pandemic. And March 12th of 2020, the world changed. You know, my husband's surgery was canceled that morning. Work shut down. I was working in the post-anesthesia recovery unit. And all of a sudden, nothing looked the same, looked normal. You know, schedules were changing 5 or 6 times in a day. You know, go here, go there, go do this, go do that. And I started that cycle again of worrying about, okay, well, now my daughter's working at the hospital. We have this mystery disease called COVID. People are dying. And, you know, PPE was a shortage. We didn't know really what to expect on anything. And I look back and I think, you know, we handled that remarkably well. With all of the unknowns, there was really nothing else we could have done in the moment. But one day I was sitting there and all of a sudden I got worried. I was like, well, I'm okay if I get COVID. I'm not really okay if my daughter gets COVID. She has some comorbidities. And I was like, what would I do without her? And so I started spinning on that. You know, it'd kind of come and I'd go, no, you're just thinking about this, you know, in a way that it doesn't work. Nothing has happened. And then one day I just got tired of thinking about it and I went for a drive. And I was like, what is going on with me? Because I could tell that I wasn't as resilient as normal. I could tell that I was using my thought to create more distress or dis-ease within me. And I called Lynn and she was like, Teresa, you are as safe as you've ever been in this moment. And I went, there it is again. I got spun up into something that wasn't real, that wasn't helpful. And as soon as I heard those words, I came back to this moment right here in the midst of chaos in my view, and I was perfectly fine. And that feeling of that knowing carried me through the rest of 2020. And we came across some really crazy stuff, you know, as far as very, very sick people, you know, shifts of working places I've never worked before. But somehow holding it all together and knowing that nothing was going to happen that I couldn't handle, that I couldn't take care of in the moment. And as it's turned out, it's been a pleasure to go through this part of my nursing career through a pandemic and know that I was perfectly safe the whole time, that I would be able to handle whatever came my way in real time. And there was nothing else to do but notice.
Teresa, I'm going to just stop you there for just a second, just to make sure we have time for everybody else. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. I just want to kind of I know when I'm speaking, I get a little yellow line around me. I want to put a box around what you just said, that we go in and out of being conscious that we're the thinker, that we're the creator of our moment-to-moment perceptions, feelings, behaviors, our whole separate reality, and that's human, that's normal. But with an understanding of these principles, it's like having a compass and you're in the wilderness. You may not know where you are, but you're never lost. You're never lost. You can always find your way back home.
Yeah.
And that's so thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing. Then we'll loop back on you when we get into the Q&A. Maybe Louise, since the nurse, we'll go 2 nurses, and then I changed my mind, Debbie. I have you go last, okay? Louise, I hope that doesn't throw you off. You have to unmute yourself there. There you go.
So hello, everybody. You can hear me okay? So I started my nursing career back in 1992 and qualified in 1995. And I had been, in my early part of career, I had skyrocketed in my career very quickly. I was a ward sister very early. I was a senior manager. I was all these things that were happening really, really fast, because life as I always knew it didn't matter how many plates that I had, I was always able to spin them all, whether that was in work, whether that was in home. And then as I was churtling through my career in 2010, 15 years after qualifying, I had burnout. And I didn't really accept this initially, but I had to have 3 months off work. And then I went back to work and did all the tick boxes of, making sure I went for a 5K run every Sunday, and that held me through for the week. Trying yoga, trying all these things and all these self-help books. And about 2013, 14, I started to go down the same path that I had been down before. And I noticed that I was having more stressful thinking and experiences that I'd had before. And this time it kind of showed up a lot different, but I was determined I wasn't going to take time out of work. So I continued on, and I started to read quite a bit at that point. Now at this point, I had already been prescribed medication because the anxiety and the depression had got so bad. And I always say that I took the pills at the time for the sake of my husband and my children, because I'd become quite a grumpy person to live with. It wasn't really for myself. I always felt that it was for their experience in life rather than mine. So I then started to read, and noticed that when I was reading that, when I was concentrating that night, I would go into a deeper sleep, that my brain would switch off a little bit. And that's where I first discovered the 3 principles. I started to read more and more. And before I knew it, around 2015, I went over to London to a conference, a weekend workshop, which was based on...
By the way, Louise is from Ireland, for those of you who haven't caught that through her accent.
Yeah, yes. So I went over to London, which of course is very far away when you live in Ireland. So I went over to a conference, and it was principles based. And the second day of the conference, I had this huge insight about where my experience was coming from. And I can only describe it on the day as like a volcano that erupted inside of me when I realized that I had been the creator of my own experience. And I suppose 6 weeks after that experience, I was off all medication with a deep knowing in my heart and soul that I never, ever would be reliant on medication for my mood. And I look back 6 years on, and I know that as much as I know my own name still. So the reason I went on the boot camp initially was to get me out of healthcare, because it was going to be a ticket to get out of healthcare. I was going to learn to be a coach and I was going to leave. But funnily enough, I have remained in healthcare, and I'm very passionate about remaining in healthcare to try and support people within healthcare to provide the best care that they can provide for the patients, because people that come into healthcare roles come in with a burning passion and desire to care, as Teresa referred to earlier, that caring that's within nursing, that is part of our initial training. So I've continued on in healthcare after that program finished, and I deepened my understanding, and I continued to deepen my understanding around the principles. I realized I didn't have a work problem. I'd had a bit of a kind of a thinking problem, an experience problem that I had learned to start to see through. And just before the pandemic started, I decided to have quite a career change in my career to date, and I moved into the role that I'm currently in, which is the lead for quality improvement for our organization. And when I look back at that couple of months before the pandemic hit, it was a massive shift for me in career. And then little did I know that a couple of months later we were going to be hit by a pandemic. And I can only say that my experience of working through the pandemic has been absolutely off the Richter scale in comparison to how I feel I would have experienced it not knowing about the principles understanding. Very soon into the pandemic, I was working closely with our medical director of the organisation, and we were having a conversation about how we could help our staff at the front line to go through, and particularly around medical staff and junior doctors. And I went on then to work collaboratively with another medic and set up what we called a Doctors Hub initiative, which was around having one point of contact for junior medical staff. Because quite often, as any of you that work in healthcare will know, junior doctors flit and flut from one organisation in healthcare to another during their career, and they're never always feel part of an organisation. So it was very much that compassionate care of trying to support them to do the best that they could do. I'm a mother as well. I have 4 children. I'm blessed to have 4 children. How they showed up in my life. My husband is, as we call, a real nurse. He's front line. He's got his pinny on and he's got his PPE on. And so we worked in the last 18 months, we worked harder than we've ever worked in healthcare. But the whole dynamic in our household was completely different. We had children going to school, we had children going to college, we had a son doing construction and my husband doing frontline. But the whole understanding, even though none of them would declare to say that they had a 3 principles understanding, the osmosis that happens, the ripple effect that has happened in our home has allowed things to just unfold with so much less effort than they would have before. My younger children call me out all the time. I find it hilarious. At times I find it quite annoying when I'm getting cross with them and they're telling me, Mom, remember, your experience is not coming from us.
Boomerang.
Yeah, boomerang. They are my biggest teachers currently. I had an interesting conversation with my nearly 21-year-old son the other day. We're preparing for his birthday currently. And he was on the phone to me and he was explaining to me, oh, Mom, you're stressing me out. It was about his birthday preparations. And I said to him, Dara, would it be at this time a useful time to remind you that your experience is not coming from me? And with that, all I heard was ding, the phone went dead because I had called him out again. So I suppose the words can't describe the difference that this has made in my life, the difference this has made in those around me. The transition from a completely new role in what I had been so used to for so long has just been with so little effort, because I often liken it to just being always able to drop an anchor that it doesn't matter. It's like you talk about, Joe, in the eye of the hurricane, that it doesn't matter how turbulent the waters are. And I get caught up in all sorts of thinking at times, and I get caught up in believing that out there is causing me this. But then when I drop that anchor in that moment and bring myself into the present moment that is, and realize that I am creating that experience for myself, that all of the stress and the pressure and the hardness and the difficulty in life just falls away, because it is just with so little effort that I'm able to kind of navigate more. And I suppose I work now, and I coach people in healthcare with this understanding. I run quality improvement programs to train people to use quality improvement methodology to make improvements right across health and social care. And this conversation that continuously comes up about, where our experience comes from. My most used analogy, I suppose, will be around the snow globe, and how that our minds are like a snow globe. And so interesting. Over recent weeks, our chief exec is just about to retire at the end of this month, and she started to, in wider discussions, refer to the snow globe and refer to myself and Louise. How is your snow globe now? And how, and she's talking about these on corporate management meetings, and you just think that if that just little small thing makes a difference for people, that what a big difference that can make in their life. So as I say, I'm happy to answer questions, but I'm conscious of time as well, Joe.
Yeah, well, thank you, Louise. That's perfect, wonderful. And one point I just wanted to underline, what you said a few minutes earlier, is the ripple effect you were talking about in your family, and also the ripple effect in an organization. I was privileged to work with Mayo Clinic in Arizona for 7 years, and started working with the CEO as his coach. And he began to change so much that it was impacting his leadership team. So he said, I want to take the principles to the whole staff. We start with the department chairs, which was a little intimidating to do a training. Keith Blevins and I did a 5-day retreat with the doctors and their spouses on the principles. But that was interesting, that even though we only trained a small percentage of the staff at Mayo Clinic, we had about 150 people go through our kind of intensive resilience program. They were all leaders, nursing directors, people in influential positions. But in that same period of time, the burnout rate went down 12% across the 6,000 employees. So the leaders impacted those around them. And that's, in a way, this does kind of go out by osmosis, by example. The feeling that we're living in, we help other people gravitate towards that resilience that's in them. So, but Debbie, I'd like you, so we can keep on track here with our time, for you to share your perspective.
Awesome.
Your
Thank
experience.
you so much, everybody. And Louise and Teresa, that was fabulous. Hi to all my beautiful friends who are on with us. So excited you're here. My background started as an occupational therapist, and I was raised in a family. I had an uncle who had a spinal cord injury, and just kind of keep that in mind because we're going to wrap back around to that. Loved working in holistic healthcare, put together corporate wellness programs, studied everything on the mind, body, thought. I just knew every technique, tool, modality under the sun. And I watched myself heal time and time again from autoimmune issues. And, forgetting that autoimmune issues have a cycle of remissions and relapse and remissions and relapse. So I came upon the principles. Joe was one of my first teachers. I was in one of my relapses as far as my health, and he put together a program about his own healing, and I was on that for a couple of weeks, and had massive insights about my own resiliency. And, when I hear Louise and Teresa speak about how we create our own experience, we don't create our own circumstances. We create how we move in and out and how we experience those circumstances. So after I was on with Joe, I was guided to be trained as a resiliency coach with Rudy and Jules Kennard, and just love them so much. And what I saw in that, though, was that there was a power inside of me that was untouched by the external circumstances. And that was the peace of God that lived in me, the divine intelligence behind life. So it was wonderful, and I was percolating, and I could not wait to put programs together. So by God's grace, I was able to put together a full Bible study on integrating the principles with scripture, and had so much fun doing that. And then joined together with a group of people who were putting together middle school curriculums. And I had done that years past in bringing conflict resolution and stress reduction into the schools. So we decided, this was pre-pandemic, to videotape them. Little did we know how important that would be. And a group of 5 of us got together, and it was magic. We had a teenager with us who we were just dialoguing about innate resiliency, about the power of thought, separate realities. And they were so much fun. They were lighthearted, but they were deep and real. We were talking about suicidal ideation, that you could have an overwhelmed suicidal thought, but you don't have to act on it. It's just a thought. And go talk to someone who's calm, get a hug, get some love. So we were taking these really, really hard subjects and making them fun for the kids. So we put that out. And then all of a sudden I started having really weird knee pain, and they did an MRI and they said, oh, it looks like meniscus. And we did everything. We did PRP, we did steroid shots, we did physical therapy, we did laser, you name it. I was praying over it. I had other people praying over it. I had affirmations. I was going back to what can I try to make this go away? And finally things got really bad and they decided to operate. And we are now full blown into pandemic. I have 14 family members on the front line in ICUs and supermarkets. So it was scary. I have to say I was scared. But understanding these principles, where I was able to come back to peace. I was able to go to God and say, just empty out, because it was overwhelming. So we scheduled the surgery. They finally opened surgery back up. And they get in there and they find all this necrotic tissue in my knee, like dead parts of my body sitting in a live human. And the doctor said, this isn't good. And they sent it out for pathology, and it came back that I once again had rheumatoid arthritis. But my SED rate was at 160, which normal is 20 and below. So I was a smoldering vat of inflammation, so sick. But I did great during the surgery. Came out of the surgery, and 2 weeks later I went septic and literally thought I was dying. I was so ill. They started digging a little deeper and they found out I had babesiosis, which is similar to malaria. Put me on treatment. The treatment caused 2 rounds of C. diff. And then I got COVID. And this was within 2 months. And it was like just a backhand slap. It was like, honey, you're going down. And I remember it was so disorienting, because what's inside of me was so well. The spirit inside of me was so well. Mentally, I was well. Emotionally, I was well. But I had this body that was just breaking down nonstop, and nothing was remedying it at all. So I don't think I've ever prayed harder than I've ever prayed. I don't think I've ever cried out to the divine intelligence behind life. For me, I call it God, I call it Christ, and felt that palpable presence stronger than I've ever felt it before. So I come out of the hospital after COVID, and by God's grace, as they're wheeling me out, I said, do a lot of people get to leave? And the nurse started to cry. And she said, no, honey, consider yourself very blessed. So I knew then that there was a purpose in the middle of my suffering. If God allowed this, he could bring something good out of that. And I've seen that time and time and time again in my life. So as I'm sitting in quarantine, all of a sudden I get like this intuitive hit, this wisdom that comes through from the divine intelligence I call the Holy Spirit, that it's time to put all the work that you've created and recorded over the years out. And I'm like, I can't even take a shower by myself. How am I supposed to do this? And I literally heard in the still small voice of my heart, you won't have to do much. You've already done it. I'll put it out. Just trust me. And within a 2-month period, 3 of the Bible studies I created were not just used in my mega church, but picked up by 3 other churches, pastoral counseling teams, prayer teams, and missions work without me doing a thing. Worship songs I had written, I just emailed to our worship leader, and at Christmas, he brought one of them to life at the Christmas service and is recording them right now. I didn't do a thing. I wrote them years ago. They were just sitting there. Our middle school mental health program, in 1 email and 1 Zoom call, got picked up by a public broadcasting station, and our 22 videos are being shown to 5 million viewers for a full year in between segments. I couldn't have done that on my own. So what I got to see was in my weakness, in what I couldn't do, there was a power and a force that flowed through me that opened things up. But what I also got to see was, if I wouldn't have gone through what I went through, I think I still would have been trying to control things and, trying to figure it out, trying to get that work out there. But it was in the full out surrender of, I can't do this. If you want it done, do it through me. And that just opened up like miracles happening. So now we're going on almost a year now that since my surgery. I am now on 24/7 oxygen. I've just been diagnosed with restrictive lung disease. My cytokine panel, which are the inflammatory storms that happen from COVID, are off the charts still. And there's a peace that passes all understanding in me. Do I still grieve at times? Absolutely. Do I still get worried and concerned when I can't breathe? Absolutely. But then all of a sudden, I'll cry out and say, Lord, I need you. I can't do this. Guide me. Show me what my next right step is. And whew, I'm guided right back to this present moment. I'm guided that I don't have to figure out the big picture, but one step after another, I will be led as to what I need to do. And that can change moment to moment. It may be on a medication for 3 weeks, and then that's it. It's time to change. What I also got to see, though, in this process was how overwhelmed the healthcare system is. In Florida right now, there are so many mistakes being made. There's so much confusion and overwhelm, and doctors spending 10 minutes with you saying, this is beyond my scope. I don't know what to do. So the other day, I was completely overwhelmed by that. I had gone through all this intensive testing, was so exhausted from it. And one doctor said it's neurological. Another doctor said it's pulmonological. The pulmonologist said it's the neurologist. The neurologist said it's the pulmonologist. And again, flat out, Lord, I surrender this to you. I can't figure this out. They can't figure it out. I'm going to forgive them because they're doing the best they can at the level of thinking they have in the moment. And they don't have the knowledge base for this. So I'm in this full surrender. I'm really at peace that no more testing, no more treatments. I'm going to rest because that's what my body needs more than anything right now. And I get a call last night from someone I've never even met, but have a mutual connection. And she called, she goes, I just called to see how you were doing. And she works for a major university. And I told her what was going on. She said, would you be open to having the head of the med school at FIU review your records and present them at grand rounds for internal medicine? And I'm like, yeah, because now I don't have to do any more tests. I don't have to travel, but I could have like some brilliant minds looking at this. And then she said, and remember, she goes, you used to work with Mark Bonacani at University of Miami. I worked for the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis for many years. Now it goes back to my uncle having a spinal cord injury when I was little. So because of that spinal cord injury in my uncle, I grew in compassion. I grew in a desire to help others. I then go to work for spinal cord injury research at University of Miami. Well, Mark is now having the entire team at University of Miami Public Health Trust, their nursing staff, all review my chart at grand rounds. Those are the miracles that happen in surrender. But it got even better because I'm part of a long haul COVID support group online. And it's not a support group. It's a bitch and moan fest. And it depresses me so much. And I kept saying, Lord, why am I on here? It doesn't help me. Well, I posted this miracle story this morning on there saying if they learn anything from me, I'll be happy to share it with all of you. And I probably gotten more than 50 replies of, oh my God, you're finally giving us hope. So it wasn't just about me. You know, there was a purpose in my pain. If God allowed it, he's going to bring something good out of that. And it's not that everything's good that happens. Tragic things happen. Catastrophic things happen. But what I know as truth is that something good can always come out of it because that power, that resiliency within us, that strength within us. I'm telling you, yesterday, I had a nurse here because I could not barely even get out of bed. So the fact that I can even talk to you guys right now and even sit up and do this is, again, the resiliency that doesn't come from me, but it comes through me, from the divine intelligence behind life, from that power greater than myself, from God Almighty working in and through me. And I'm just so humbled and I'm so grateful. And Joe, I love you so much because, you know, you opened up my eyes that it was not my diagnoses. I was not my symptoms. I was not the thoughts in my head. But there was a power in me that was resilient no matter what. So I'm just so grateful.
Thank you, Debbie, so much.
You're so welcome.
Whoa! Wow. Well, let's hear from all of you. If you have any questions, we've got 10 minutes left. And I'm certainly willing to go over if you want to. Anybody does. But just you go down to your little reaction thing, and there's a hand on there that you can raise your hand. I believe that's where it is.
I just want to say I'm not an academic or a healthcare worker or anything, but I was so touched by the stories I've heard. And it really, I'm one of those people that's constantly seeking that peace in the midst of things. And it's nothing like what you guys face, but I can create a hurricane with my own little stuff that's just as real to me, you know. And I just really feel like a lot of this stuff I try to understand with my thinking mind. You know, I read books that are like 900 pages long, but I heard the teaching condensed in some simple sentences that really helped me understand how to get that peace, let it go through me, drop anchor, all those great things. And Teresa, I really became hooked when I heard you cite the date of the moment that you had that powerful insight. And so I just have to say, I was just so stimulated by this conversation. Thank you guys so much. Really empowering.
Thanks, James. And any of the speakers, if you have anything you want to add as well, if anyone else has a comment or question, just raise your hand. Michael.
First, I want to say everything has been absolutely touching from everybody. Thank you. And then I'll do a little change. I'm in Joe's office. Would you like to trade places with me so you're not cutting out?
No, it's okay. They don't have to see my.
You're still cutting out. And you guys are just, honest to God, I am so moved by every word. And I can't even comment appropriately. So thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Yeah, Lynn, unmute yourself.
I just am remembering I was standing behind you when you introduced yourself to Sidney Banks, and he said, "We've been waiting for you." And I just think that we're all here still on the edge of the cliff, ready and waiting for what comes next. And we can't know what that will be, but we know that we are ready. And it is such a privilege to be here now. It is such an incredibly beautiful privilege to be in the midst of healthcare providers at this point in time on our planet. It's just a joy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for all you're doing. Lynn and Teresa are working on an audio or an app for nurses and doing great work with coaching nurses. Anybody that's a healthcare provider here wants to get in touch with them, they can just write me and I'll get you their information.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment, a question? Donna, where's Donna?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just, my picture's not on, but first I wanted to thank you so much for doing this today. And I want to thank all the speakers and the healthcare workers. You know, it's so refreshing to hear people who are healthcare workers and to hear sometimes their struggles. I think sometimes we tend to think as doctors and healthcare workers as holding it all together and always being able to, but you know, we're all human, and they really brought that out today. But they also shared how their experiences and their study has brought them to a place where they don't have to fall into illness or get into a place where they can't take care of themselves. And I too want to thank Debbie, who I know and love personally, and who is such a beacon of light to so many people here in the South Florida area. And she just has so much faith and trust in God, and she continues to give so much of us hope. And you know, I love when she shares all the different places that she's learned so many different principles and ideas of how to get through things, because we're all looking for that. We're all looking for ways to get through things that are difficult. And you know, I'm very grateful that I have a God that I trust and love, and depend on no matter what's going on. You know, I just want to thank you for doing this today. The first time I've listened to one of these, so I really appreciate everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna. Anybody else? We've got a couple more minutes, about 4 more minutes. And as I said, we can go over a little bit if people want to. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Raise your hand. Well, if nobody has a question or comment, do any of the three of you have anything that you add to what you, I know I had to cut you short, all three of you. So if you have anything that you would like to add before we wrap things up?
I just have one more thing to share, Joe. For anybody who's listening right now, how, no matter what you're facing, there is an internal strength within you that is not impacted by the circumstances you are in. And when we're walking into something and walking through something or being carried through something, my tape in my head very often was, I can't do this. It's too much for me to bear. And then I could bear it. And it's the same with each of us. You know, we never know the inner resiliency and the strength we have within us till we tap into it. But it's there. And it's just our thinking that tells us we'll never get through this, because we're always one thought away from peace. We're always one feeling away from peace. We can be one moment away from healing, even when our body's not doing what we want it to do. And that full healing may be full and complete, miraculous. I've had them, Joe's had them. That full healing could be the grace to walk through whatever it is you're walking through. That's still healing. You know, so I think it's just so important to remember that there's a separation between the circumstance and who we really are. Because who we really are is made in the image of God, made in the image of divine intelligence, that divine intelligence flowing in and through us, that's untouched by the external circumstances. And in our humanness, we're going to go through the ups and the downs, the ins and the outs, the worry, the grief, all that. But like a rainbow, would a rainbow be beautiful if it was just purple? No, it's the fullness of it that makes it so exquisite. So I see that within every human being. There's nothing special about me. Everybody has that. If they just look in that direction, it's there.
You're something there, girl. Wow, thank you so much. And I love what you said, that you're not special. We all have that same essence, that same connection to whatever that is, whatever you want to call that, universal consciousness or intelligence or God. We're all part of that. Can't be separate from it. And as helpers, as psychologists, as nurses, as doctors, as people who are on the front lines of helping people, the more that we know that about ourselves, the more that we see that in all of our patients and all of our clients. We see health. Seeing that health, instead of just seeing what's wrong or the disease, but seeing through that to who that person is what gives hope. It is what is present to the human relationship. It's what brings out the feeling of caring. What's the essence of healing? Is caring. We're caring, and caring is love. And we're in the moment when we're not bound up by all of our stresses and our thoughts and our worries and feelings of inadequacy. We're available to help and be of service to other people. So thank you all so much for listening, for being a part of it. If anyone has any questions after this, or if you're watching this as a recording on Spotify or YouTube or whatever you want to, and tell your friends, those of you who are here. This is recorded, it's available on, I think, about, and how many different sites, lots of different sites.
Any place you want to get your music.
Anyway, it's everywhere, and every supermarket, every gas station, you can get it.
Every elevator.
Even the underwaters, it's available. I don't know how, but it is. Anyway, thank you all for listening and for being a part of the podcast today. Look forward to the next podcast, which is in 3 weeks from today, where we'll have 2 people talking about dealing with chronic illness and their understanding of the principles, how that's helped them transform their chronic illness to a good life. So look forward to checking that in a few weeks.